Did nobody else play the bath game? Okay, let me just get straight to the point. I do not believe for 1 second that no other child played the bath game growing up. I'm convinced that my friends are trolling me, but they're not responding to my messages, and so I'm left with little choice to bring my question here, hoping someone will know what the heck I'm talking about. I was around 5 or 6 years old when my babysitter introduced me to the idea of the bath game. She said it was a fun way to engage the imagination and that I could find something truly special within the water. I didn't question it, even then, because she was the boss and I thought she was pretty. I didn't want to make her mad by refusing or risk having my Nintendo taken away if I was disobedient, so when my mom told her to bathe me one night, I was excited to try it. Her instructions were pretty simple, and I'd come to write them down because with any game there has to be rules. 1. You must do the bath game alone. These instructions can be given, but you have to be isolated for the game to begin. The tub should have a sort of thick bath soap that includes a lot of suds and a dark liquid. Ensure the top of the water is obscured and the sides are caked in it, including the handles, to get out. 3. Only hot water. No cold and no resistance upon getting into the water. If it hurts, it will pass as your skin gets used to it. Ignore any reddening on the skin. Rule 4. Take a deep breath. Make sure it hurts just a little. No, you will not be coming back up for a while. 5. Dive in and don't look back or rise up. Allow the current to take you and keep your eyes open. 6. Your vision will blur, but it will eventually clear and you'll see something in the plug hole. Go to it. 7. Trust in what you see. Let your body relax. 8. When you meet the Sea Emperor and the lights above the water go out, you've won the bath game and can come up for air. The babysitter was so excited she could barely contain herself, bouncing around with wide eyes, a thick liquid flowing from her eyes. She didn't even bother wiping it, content to be sharing in my submersion by proxy. I stood there in my bath towel, expecting her to follow me in, but she shook her head, nostrils flaring. Only you. Rule number 1, remember? She beamed, and I felt my face grow hot. She was so pretty. You're special. I can't wait for you to win and get your prize. What do I get? I was eager, but I had to know. What kid didn't love prizes? Her lip twitched, and she took a moment to answer, but I remember her expression never changed. Not once. Her teeth chattered as she said one word. Freedom. I had no idea what she meant, but in my mind I assumed like any child it was gaming all night, eating what I wanted and no school. What kid wouldn't want that? I went in and noticed the bath was already running. A thick soap I'd used to give myself foam beards was caking the entire tub, save for one spot to safely get in. The water so hot it was steaming up the mirror and making my body sweat. Rules 2 and 3 were taken care of, it seemed. A little freaked out but unperturbed, I took a couple of practice breaths before inhaling deep, feeling the pressure mount and slowly stepping into the tub, careful not to let my feet slip. Even at that age, I knew I could easily hit my head on the faucet and cave my skull in. Nothing was going to stop me winning this game. The water looked inviting, but murky. The thick paste had covered the top in a layer of foam with small patches of the black liquid poking through, the bottom obscured and creating an illusion of depth. As my feet touched the water, I felt the searing heat ripple through my skin, threatening to tear at the flesh. But you'd be amazed at how determined a child can be when a prize is up for grabs. I decided in my infinite wisdom that I'd brave it in one go. I exhaled and let my body up to my neck sink down, the pain enough to make me yelp and try to get out. But after a couple of moments, I took one final deep breath and pushed on, submerging myself fully. Eyes burned and senses dulled in the inky, hot blackness. It felt like swimming through tar, but as the rules suggested, ignoring it was the only way forward. My stomach pushed in protest and muscles began to burn, but I focused on letting the current take me, not even questioning how a current was a thing in the bathtub. I did wonder, was it always this wide and deep? I focused on the sinkhole and saw long, scaled hands protruding from either side. The nails sharp and cracked, soft flesh flapping in the water and coming off in small chunks. It started pushing at the edges of the sinkhole and widening it, my body steadily being pulled towards it as the lights above darkened and the burning in my chest became less of a problem. In fact, everything in my body relaxed, and all I had to do was float. I saw into the sinkhole, and it took many years of reflection with an adult mind to figure out what I had experienced as a child. Words still fail me 30 years later. They're inadequate and unable to capture the beauty below. A sprawling obsidian city meshed into coral reefs that pulsated colors I recognized, and many I had never seen before or since. The further I descended, the more blinding my eyes got, as if they were guiding me to land. Further down, at the entrance to the city, 2 large statues loom either side to a grand throne. Their imposing pilot lights swinging on their skulls, orbs for eyes and mouths in places they shouldn't be, one holding the tip of a sword with several spikes running the hilt, and the other a grand hammer. It's when I see the throne that I feel a burning in my chest return and something pulling me back and up. It's empty, and yet it's not. Something is sitting upon it, but it isn't. A flickering image, or perhaps my eyes deemed it too much to bear full witness to. But I felt it in that moment. It knew I was disobeying the rules and saw fit to punish me. It craned its horrific skull up towards me, and as it smiled, the eyes blinded me, filling my body with such agony that my ribs felt as if they would snap under the pressure. Eardrums burst and skull split open. I felt as if I was dying. My next memory was being in a hospital bed, unable to speak, and a tube down my throat. I was beyond terrified to be hooked up to machines, and even more scared that I'd let down the babysitter, that the creature in the sinkhole was coming for me. I thrashed around until my mom's concerned face came into focus and she soothed me. Tears stained my face, and I was faced with a long recovery, both physically and mentally. Therapists came and went. None of them believed the bath game was real. Every single one of them told me without fail that my babysitter was simply mentally unwell, that she tried to manipulate me and drown me, and that all I'd seen was my oxygen-starved brain. But I knew better. Even when she was sentenced to a mental institution and apologized for deceiving me, I knew better. I never deviated from that one pervasive thought that burrowed into my brain like a parasite. I'd failed the game. I bring this all up because I know someone has experienced this. They have to have seen it. It's too specific for one person out of 7.5 billion to have gone through. Does anybody remember the way the tub expanded when you dove in? The widening sinkhole with the great hands? The weird, indescribable lights of coral reefs beneath the tub? The fishmen statues holding artifacts of power? The sea emperor that resides between realities? Everyone in Sturgeon says I'm crazy. They don't believe me. But I'll have proof for them soon. I tried recreating the game myself over the years. But maybe my failure was simply too egregious, and the Emperor simply won't allow me to retake it. I've caught glimpses in the steamed-up mirrors, though. Promises of what could be. If I just show the resolve to go there again. Thankfully, my son can do it for me. He's so excited, having grown up on the stories of what lays beneath the sinkhole in the bathtub. I made him wait until he was older to undertake the game. I had to ensure if he told others that they wouldn't think him too young. I sent him in about a half hour ago. I can only hope the fact that he hasn't returned is proof he met the Sea Emperor, but he shouldn't be there much longer, right? I want to go check on him, but because I lost, I don't think I'm permitted to interfere. I even stood outside the door, ready to pull on the handle, but my legs won't stop shaking. I feel my throat close up and sweat run down my head. Perhaps it's a sign not to interfere. Please, someone, anyone, tell me I'm not crazy, that I'm not alone. Someone has to remember the bath game. Because as my mind wanders and fear creeps in, all I can think of is the prize my babysitter promised. The prize my son has been promised. Freedom. They're neat toys, aren't they? Somehow both terrifying and adorable. Little fuzzy creatures with predatorial front-facing eyes. I've always had mixed feelings about them, but they never spooked me. I didn't believe my little sister when she said hers actually ate. Katie always did have an active imagination and sometimes would get wrapped up in her own thoughts. I chalked this up to another one of her fantasies. Over the following days, however, she insisted it was true, that it really did eat. I decided to humor her and keep an eye on the toy, just like she asked. Katie herself seemed rather unconcerned, and so I wasn't worried. I thought I wouldn't find anything. I was wrong. On the first day I watched the Furby, everything was fine. The little teal-gray toy uttered its usual phrases and moved its eyes and ears joyously and loudly. My little sister laughed at its antics as she drew in a coloring book. After a few minutes of this, I was preparing to leave, but right before, I did notice something. The Furby seemed to be staring at me, completely silent and with eyes unblinking as it gazed into my soul. I thought it was broken, and so I tapped it a little and it started to blink again. The toy was a bit creepy, I thought, but perfectly normal and fine. The next day, though, Katie begged me to watch the Furby again. She said as soon as I left yesterday, the toy had begun to walk around. It was ridiculous, of course. They can't do that, I said, trying to be delicate. I couldn't blame her for having an imagination. But she insisted that was the case and that she wasn't lying. So after a lot of pleading, I went to watch the Furby again. An hour passed where I just sat in Katie's room looking at that toy. Katie was there too, but whereas yesterday she had been happy and laughing while the Furby sat by her, today she was solemn. She sat drawing in a coloring book and stayed as far away from the toy as she could get. After that hour had passed, I was getting tired of this, and so I decided to inspect the Furby closer. "Don't do that," Katie said. "He'll get angry." "It'll be fine," I answered, and I held the Furby up. Something was caught in its beak. It looks like... "Katie, did you feed the Furby real spaghetti?" I asked, concerned. "No," she said. "He took it from the kitchen after dinner." "Katie, you can't give it real food," I said with a frown. "I didn't do anything," she answered. I went to take the pasta strand from the Furby's beak, but when I pulled, only more spaghetti came out. A strand several inches thick dangled from its plastic mouth. "Did you stuff it inside the toy?" I said loudly. "I didn't do anything," she answered again, meeker this time. I kept pulling the pasta strand. More kept coming out. Eventually, the last of it slipped from the Furby's beak. It was a bit over a foot long. Tomato sauce dripped onto the floor and coated the Furby's front. I pried open the toy's mouth. There was a little hole at the back of the beak that shouldn't have been there. It probably led inside the robot itself. "Katie, if you ruin the toy, Mom and Dad will be very upset," I said. "I didn't do it," she repeated quietly. I sighed and went to leave, but as I did, Katie started crying and begged me to take away the Furby. I calmed her down and said everything would be fine. I decided to take the toy to my room so she wouldn't have to look at it. I threw it in a desk drawer and padlocked it shut for good measure. When I went to sleep that night, it seemed like that would be the end of it. No more trouble with the toy and no more worry for Katie. At least that's what I thought. On the third day, though, everything went wrong. It started when I woke up. I didn't know what was happening at first, but then I moved and I felt it. Pain. I could feel a stinging pain in my side, and so I threw back the covers and lifted my pajama shirt. There was blood everywhere. Tiny pieces of my right torso were missing, little wounds half an inch wide. They had scabbed over now, but splotches of blood covered my shirt and my bed. I don't know how I could have slept through whatever happened. I couldn't make sense of what on earth was going on, what had happened, or what I should do. But soon, a thought crossed my mind. The Furby, that toy. Katie said it walked and that it ate. But that couldn't have been real, right? This was probably just some sort of a bed bug or something. A piece of plastic couldn't possibly have done this to me. Still, though, that manic thought about the Furby stuck with me, and so I decided to put it to rest. To reaffirm the truth that my sister was just a 7-year-old girl with an overactive imagination. I went over to the desk drawer and opened it up. The Furby was gone. In its place was a hole in the bottom of the drawer. I looked closer. The flimsy wood had given away easily. Someone had broken the bottom panel and taken the toy. I ran to my sister's room. She was crying in the corner. "It's under the bed!" she screamed at me. "What is?" I asked. Katie didn't answer. I stared in disbelief at the little white bed by the center of the wall. "Did you break my desk?" I asked her. She just kept crying. I turned back to the bed and slowly walked towards it. This is crazy, I thought. There's no way this is happening. I crouched down to see underneath it. Closer and closer, I inched towards the bed frame, staring into the darkness underneath. And then I got up a little and pushed the bed to the side. There was nothing underneath it, but there was something along the wall. Someone had unscrewed the panel covering the air duct. I turned to leave and go comfort Katie when I noticed something else. I pushed the bed more and revealed an object lying on the ground. At first I thought it was just a plastic bag, but then I realized it was damp and organic, wet and rotting. Panic overwhelmed me as I realized what it was. A cocoon. Wet, translucent, and freshly broken. What in the world? I thought. What did this? This can't have been a Furby. There's no way. This is all ridiculous. What in heaven's name is going on? But even as I thought these things, doubt creeped into my mind. The cocoon looked real, actually organic, and a foul smell like rotten eggs rose up from it. Maybe there's something inside our house. Some bug or something that cocooned and changed, but I have no idea what. With the size of that cocoon, though, it'd have to be the biggest bug I'd ever seen. But if that's the case, and something went through a metamorphosis, then what did it change into? I set my thoughts aside and went to comfort Katie. "Do you know where Mom and Dad are?" I asked her. "They left for work," she said. She stopped crying a little and started to calm down. I uttered her reassurances as I took her hand. "We have to go now," I said. "We have to leave." She nodded in agreement. Before we left, I took some things from the bathroom and then another thing from Mom and Dad's room. I have to stay prepared. After I left with Katie down the stairs, we bolted towards the back door. We had almost made it there when I heard a noise echoing across the house, a rapid scuttling sound of 1,000,000 feet. "Snake!" Katie screamed. I looked back and just briefly saw something move behind the kitchen counter. Oh my Lord. I backed away, squeezing Katie's hand tighter as I did. The back door swung open easily and I shoved Katie outside, following closely behind her. We ran in the middle of the yard where we stayed waiting. I kept Katie behind me as I stared at the open back door. That scuttling noise continued to echo from the kitchen and then it stopped. For several minutes there was nothing but silence as I stared at the open back door. "There!" Katie yelled as she pointed at the fence. And just briefly did I see a long, teal gray object drop into a bush on my left. A terrible screeching noise came from the bush as I heard the scuttling sound again. Katie tugged on my shirt, wanting to run, but I didn't. Instead, I took out the hairspray I had taken from the bathroom and the lighter I'd taken from my parents' room, holding them out in front of me. I ignited the lighter and pressed on the capless hairspray. A plume of fire erupted into the air and covered the bush. The screeching inside grew closer. Katie stayed safely behind me as I kept dousing the bush in flames. Soon the screeching became a garbled cry, horrific furbish noises from hell resounding through the air. I must have used the whole can of hairspray, so determined I was to kill it. An insectile screaming filled the yard.
and then grew quieter until there was no sound but the crackling fire. Eventually, the flames cleared, the last embers dying down. Blackened vegetation covered the ground, and I could see a little teal-gray object within the charred debris. There was no more screeching. I used my toe to dust it off. It was indeed the Furby, but it was just a normal piece of plastic. A melted, destroyed toy made of charred metal and singed fur. Nothing like the thing I had heard scuttling. But I think I did kill it. Me and my family haven't been bothered since it happened, and there's no way it could have escaped the fire. I would have seen it. I'm feeling a lot better now. It's been a while since everything happened. It feels like a lifetime ago. But I think it's really over now. Katie seems to be doing better now, too. She had nightmares at first, but she's starting to sleep well again. Her days are once more filled with peace and joy. It's almost like she'd forgotten. It seems like that sometimes. Like I could forget. Just pretend it all never happened. That I never saw what I did. But there's one thing that's burned into my head. A moment that haunts me still. When I burned the toy in the bush, there was a smell. An overpowering, delicious smell of cooking meat.
Hello everyone, Giggles here. Just here to say thank you for watching and to thank the long list of my patrons from my recently made Patreon. I know there's not much there yet, and I appreciate your patience while I try to think of worthwhile rewards and Patreon exclusives. So a very special thank you to the long list of my patrons. So Much Heresy and William Dalphin. If you want to add to the list and become a patron, check the link in the description and don't forget to join my Discord where you can make suggestions for my next improv creepypasta. All recorded in one shot. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I'll see you in the next video.
Every year, my family would get a family photo taken. We would always go to the same place, the local park. We then all stand in front of a large oak tree and pose for that year's family photo. Every year, we would always ask our close family friend Terry to take the photo. It was our one tradition that we would follow every year as a family. We followed this tradition for over 15 years. My family isn't really what you would call a close family. We all get along well enough, but we have always been too different from one another to ever have a really close bond. Despite this, though, the day we would take our family photo would be the one day of the year that I could feel a real sense of unity, and we really felt like a close family. My family consists of me, my mother, my father, my younger sister Samantha, and my older brother Jake. 5 of us in total. Me and my siblings always had an alright relationship growing up. We fought often, but we always found a way to forgive each other before starting our next argument. Over the years, however, we began to drift apart. I think as we got older and got more responsibilities in life, we all found it too difficult to maintain our relationship with one another. Jake had a few kids and moved to a different state, and Samantha became a fairly successful lawyer and so was always very busy. Both of my parents have since passed away as well. So in terms of family, I don't really have any now. When my parents passed away, they left everything to us 3 kids, and then we divided it up between each of us. Somehow, I ended up with all of the family photos that were taken throughout the years. Maybe I was missing my family, or maybe I was feeling nostalgic, but whatever it was, I decided I wanted to look through the old family photos and reminisce on years gone by. I went up to the old desk that is sitting inside of a small study room and opened the top drawer. Inside, there was a large pile of old papers that I hadn't been through for many years. I searched through the old bills and old letters, looking for the photos that I knew I had placed in this drawer. I had to search through all of the paper, and at the bottom of the drawer sat the small stack of photographs of me and my family standing in front of that old oak tree. I gathered them up and closed the drawer before heading out of the study and sitting in the armchair that is in my lounge room. I looked down at the photograph that was on top of the pile. I remembered that years ago I had placed the photos in chronological order, and so the photograph on top was the earliest one taken. I was about 3 in the photograph. My parents were both standing behind me, and my brother Jake was next to me. Samantha wasn't born yet, so she didn't make an appearance in this edition of the family photo. I flickered through the photos, watching me and my brother grow older in each one, and then seeing my sister make an appearance in the 4th photo. I then saw both me and my siblings grow into older kids, and then teenagers, and just as I was beginning to look like a woman, the photos ended. I knew why the photos ended there. It wasn't because we were getting too old for it. I knew it was because my parents would no longer be able to be in them. And I don't think us kids felt right about taking the photos if our parents would be absent for them. I continued looking until I got to the last photo. I was looking at both my parents in the images, looking back at their smiling faces. Smiling because they didn't yet know what would happen to the two of them. Then something caught my eye. Behind the back of both my parents, between the branches of the old oak tree, a man was standing in the background, facing the camera and smiling. He was a very strange-looking man. He had long gray hair that hung around the side of his head, but he was balding on top. He was missing a number of teeth, and so his mouth was almost a gaping black hole. His eyes, however, were probably the strangest thing. They almost appeared red, but that must have been because of the flash of the camera. I laughed a little bit to myself, thinking that we'd been photobombed. I then finished flicking through all the photos and so was back at the beginning. I was about to put the photos back in the drawer, but that's when I saw him again. I saw him again, the same man, standing in the same spot behind my parents. The man looked the same age as he did in the previous photo, even though this one was many years earlier. He also had that same expression on his face, staring and smiling at the camera. His eyes were also the same shade of red that they were in the previous photo. I was a bit worried at this point. I mean, how could he appear in both photos that were taken 15 years apart? I then looked at the next photo, and standing behind the oak tree behind my parents was the same man, looking exactly the same, his eyes still red. I then started to flick through each photo once again, and in each photo, in the same spot, stood this mysterious stranger. The more I looked, however, the more I began to think he wasn't smiling at the camera, but instead was laughing at my family there, at my family standing there. I didn't know who this man was, and I didn't know why he was always standing there between my parents and watching my family. I tried to think of different rational explanations. Maybe this man knew that we took a photo every year and so planned to always be in the background of the photo. Or maybe it was one of my parents' friends playing a joke on us. I managed to convince myself that it was someone my parents knew and they were just playing a joke. Whew, this helped comfort me enough and helped me to try to forget what I had seen. I decided to turn on the television to further take my mind off of it. I switched it on and watched whatever was on for an hour or two. But that's when it happened. The words "breaking news" appeared, interrupting whatever sitcom I was watching. The newsreader began to speak, and an image of a man I knew all too well appeared on the screen. Terry Sturt, convicted murderer, has died today, the newsreader said, as the image of Terry, my parents' close friend and the photographer of all of our family photographs, appeared on the screen. He died in his cell after a long battle with cancer. Terry was convicted back in 1996 of the murder of Edward and Teresa Barter. The newsreader continued as a photo of my parents flashed up on the screen. Terry Sturt has always maintained that he was innocent, and today, in a deathbed confession, he revealed who he believes is responsible for the death of what Terry calls his closest friends. Terry claims that the man responsible is a man by the name of Paul Randling. However, 7 News can reveal that Paul Randling had long since been dead before the murders of Edward and Teresa Barter took place. The newsreader finished speaking, and the sitcom I was watching began to play once more. I couldn't get that man out of my head, though. Paul Randling. Paul Randling? Paul Randling, Paul Randling, Paul Randling. My brain repeated over and over. I hadn't heard of that name before, but I had to know who it was. I pulled out my phone and opened Google and typed the name Paul Randling into the search bar and then hit search. Most of the results were for Facebook profiles of people with that name. After a bit of searching, however, I managed to find an article with the name Paul Randling in it. I began to read. Murderer Paul Randling will face life in prison February 5th, 1943. Paul Randling has today been sentenced for the hideous crime of a double murder. He's been convicted of murdering a young couple in cold blood. The couple's names cannot be revealed, but it is known that they have left behind 2 young children. Randling, 58, will be facing life in prison for his crimes and will likely never see the outside of a jail cell ever again. Underneath the article was a small drawing of Randling, and it was unmistakable. This was the man in the photograph that was standing behind my parents. I didn't know what this meant. How could this man that was jailed in the 1940s be in the background of all my family photographs? I decided to look at the photos once again, just to make sure it was the same person. I picked up the small stack of photos and looked at the one on top. But the man was no longer standing behind my parents. He had moved. I looked through all of the photos and it was the same in all of them. He had moved from behind my parents. He was now standing right behind me.
My mom always liked to collect teeth that fell out when I was a child. I'm not entirely sure why she wanted to keep them, but I didn't really think too much either. It was just something that she did. I remember that she would always claim that it was bad luck to throw away a tooth. She was a very superstitious woman, and growing up with her, some of that rubbed off on me. She kept all of my teeth inside of a small wooden box with a coat of chipping red paint. Inside, red velvet lined the bottom and sides of the box, creating a soft interior for the teeth to lay on. She kept this square box inside of her top drawer on her bedside table. I only ever saw this box make an appearance when I would lose another tooth and she would go get the box and put the tooth into it. Other than that, it stayed hidden within her drawer. I never really thought about the box and my missing teeth. I forgot it even existed until yesterday. I recently moved out of my mom's house, and so in the process of moving all my stuff out and into my new apartment, I entered my former home and residence of my mother, ready to pack up the final few items that still needed moving. My mom was sitting at her kitchen table wearing long pants, a thick sweater, and woolly pink gloves. It was a strange sight to behold due to the fact that it was a pretty warm day, but she's such an eccentric woman, so I dismissed it. I greeted her and she looked up at me and made a small grunt-like noise that I assumed meant hello. She was sometimes a bit dismissive, especially because she wasn't too happy about me moving out. I continued on into the house, grabbing whatever was left of my stuff. I grabbed some clothes, a bottle of shampoo, a couple of photo frames, and then I remembered the old wooden box of old teeth. I didn't have any real reason for wanting to take it with me, but I guess I didn't want to risk any bad luck by not bringing it along. I wandered into my mom's room, which I know I probably shouldn't have done, and I walked right over to the nightstand and was just about to open it when I remembered that I should probably ask for her permission before snooping around her things. So I called out to my mom, who was still situated in the kitchen. "Hey Mom, is it alright if I grab the box that you keep my teeth in?" I yelled out. "Is there something you don't want me to see in your top drawer?" I waited for a response from Mom. I swore I heard a slight grunting noise that vaguely sounded like a yes, so maybe stupidly I opened the top drawer and plucked out the small box that sat atop a pile of old photographs. I opened the box, expecting to see around 20 teeth sitting within its wooden grasp. As I lifted the lid, I immediately saw that the box was filled to the brim with teeth. Not just baby teeth, but full-sized adult teeth as well. There had to be at least 100 just piled on top of each other. As I stared down into the box, I heard a noise behind me, like a soft grunting sound. I spun around sharply and saw my mom standing right there. She made another muffled sound, and I noticed that her mouth didn't open. Something was definitely wrong. First, she was only making noises and not talking, and second, she was collecting teeth that didn't belong to me. What's going on? Whose teeth are these? And what are you doing with them? I asked in a tone that commanded an answer. She stared at me, and her eyes provided me with some sort of answer. She was afraid. I could see it just by looking into her eyes. But was she afraid that I just discovered her horrible little secret, or afraid because something dark and terrible was happening to her? She then opened her mouth, which gave me a much more detailed explanation. As her lips parted, I saw a normal row of teeth sitting along her gums. She then opened her mouth more, slightly tilting her head backwards as she did, and it revealed another row of teeth behind. They were jutting out of the roof of her mouth. Her entire mouth was filled with perfectly white teeth. I then noticed that the bottom of her mouth also had teeth growing out of it. Along the sides of her tongue, teeth sprouted and protruded upwards. I let out a small yelp, both surprised and scared of what I had just seen. She looked into my eyes expecting this reaction. She lifted both hands, grasped a gloved hand with the other, and slid her left hand mitten off. The sight of a hand absolutely covered in teeth is not one that I ever expected to witness in my life, but here it was. Covering her entire hand and onto her wrist, numerous teeth emerged from underneath the skin, poking through like sprouts growing out of the dirt. Her hand was covered in the enamel growths, and no skin was visible underneath the teeth. My stomach heaved at the sight, probably both in disgust and genuine terror. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She took off the other glove, revealing an identical hand made up of teeth that had broken through the surface of her skin. Sensing my feeling of revulsion, I would have thought Mom would have stopped there, but she took off the woolly jumper, uncovering the rows of teeth that sat along her entire arms. Her chest area also sprouted teeth, but they were still mostly underneath the skin, like they hadn't fully grown through yet. Not like the rest of her body. I didn't need to see it, but I assumed her legs would also be covered in teeth. I watched on in horror as I saw one of the teeth near her shoulder wobble. It wobbled only slightly, but I could tell that it was loose. She had a loose tooth on her shoulder. The wobbling continued, and as I saw the tooth begin to push its way out of her skin, it gave a final wriggle before falling to the floor, completing its life cycle. I couldn't help but stand there, frozen in fear at what was occurring. I didn't know what to do. I knew I should try to help her, but shock wouldn't allow me. Not just yet. Mom then turned around and walked out of her bedroom. I stood for a moment longer before following, rather apprehensively. When I caught up to her, she was sat back down at the kitchen table, one tooth-covered arm resting on the table. The other clutched a pen. I'm not sure how she managed to hold a pen, but I knew it must have been painful to bend her fingers around it, as it would stretch the skin underneath the teeth. She must have fought through this pain because she held the pen and she brought it down to a piece of paper that was sitting on the kitchen table, and began to write. I approached the table, curious as to what was being written. I was terrified at this point and hoped that she was providing more answers as to what was happening to her. I walked up to it and started to read. What she had written was the most terrifying thing so far. I know you are scared. I was too when I found your grandmother in this state. She looked awful, just as I do now. She didn't know what was happening to her, but luckily death came quickly to her to stop the suffering. I never expected it to happen to me. I prayed that it never would. And yet here I am, plagued by the same affliction as my mother. I'm sorry to tell you this. I think it might be hereditary. Looking back, I think 2016 was the worst year of my life. I had just barely managed to graduate high school. I experienced my first heartbreak when I broke up with my boyfriend, but worst of all, my grandma passed away. She was a very important person in my life and raised me more than my own very busy parents did. Grandma was warm and inviting, and the only person who ever really seemed to have time for me. On top of that, she was incredibly creative, and this translated to some very impressive arts and crafts projects we did together when I was younger. My grandma's greatest passion in life was cooking. And boy, was she good at it. She put every home-style restaurant to shame without question. She spoiled our family as much as she could with our Sunday night dinners and impromptu get-togethers. Towards the end of her life, however, she was increasingly more homebound and could only make a trip to see the family around the holidays. During those times, she would always make her most famous dish, sweet potato casserole. It was sweet, spiced, and tasted of the goodness of the earth. Everyone loved it so much that she often joked that she'd never sell the recipe. Unless for a small fortune, of course. So when I was helping clean out her things from her old house, I was ecstatic to find a little recipe box under her sink with all of her classics inside, including the one for the sweet potato casserole. I took it home with me, excited to try and recreate the dish. And part of me teared up imagining being able to keep her legacy going, eventually teaching the recipe to my own kids, and then to their kids, and so on. It was the first time in a while that I had felt any kind of hope towards my own future. Unfortunately, the bottom of the little box was water damaged, probably from being under the leaky sink for so long. From the dust-covered top of the box, I could tell Grandma most likely had all of them memorized. I was deeply upset when I flipped through and saw the sweet potato casserole recipe was damaged. Most of the card was still intact, but part of the last ingredient was smeared and illegible because of the water damage. The recipe was pretty standard. Sweet potatoes, brown sugar, marshmallows, etc. But the last ingredient had me confused. I squinted my eyes and could barely make out 2 tablespoons of hewn flesh. I chuckled nervously. Funny joke from the grave, Grandma, huh? But the more I thought about it, the more that didn't seem right. She was never one for dark jokes. In fact, I remember one time she smacked me upside the head for a similar tasteless joke I made when I was younger. And then Grandma went on some tangent about Jesus and it not being holy. She was a classic God-fearing woman. I thought hard. Maybe I was reading it wrong. I knew the whole word wasn't there, so there was no way the recipe could actually call for human flesh, right? My eyes floated over the easily legible word flesh. Strange word choice. I flipped over the card and saw there was a note for the last ingredient under an asterisk. The younger ones are more tender, and it's always more satisfying to harvest them yourself. I put the card in the box away. My stomach rolled uncomfortably, and I suppressed the urge to vomit. The wording seemed so deliberate. I thought back to how frail Grandma became in her own age. Surely there would be no way she could keep up with doing that. But then I thought about how infrequently she made the casserole towards the end, and how the recipe only called for 2 tablespoons. It was possible one harvest could have lasted her quite a while. As soon as the thought surfaced in my mind, I pushed it back. I didn't want to consider the implications that every year she could have been feeding it to the whole family. Something we all ate with smiles and looked forward to. I stored the box of recipes far away and tried not to think about it all. But as the weeks went by, I couldn't get the thoughts out of my head and the taste of Grandma's dish. It was a lot easier than I thought it would be. He was alone, walking home from school on a short patch of road surrounded by woods that divided the suburbs. He was maybe 7 or 8, I'm not sure. Kid barely made a noise. When he finally realized what was happening, he was already gagged and in the trunk of my car. I'm glad I moved out of my parents' place after I graduated. The place wasn't much, but it was secluded. The boy didn't put up much of a fight, and my assumption earlier had proven true. After the 2 tablespoons were removed, I still had plenty left, and parts that couldn't be used were disposed of. The cleanup was a little tedious and took quite a while. After a quick trip to the store, I had everything I needed. I set to work on the recipe, and only a little while later, the sweet potato casserole was baking. The smell of holidays with Grandma filled my house, and I was reminded of better times. While it was cooking, I got a call from my dad. He said that while looking through Grandma's old books, he found some picture albums and recipe books. Tingling with curiosity, I asked him to drop the cookbooks off. With the unblemished cookbook in my hand, my timer dinged, letting me know that the casserole was ready. I got out a plate and served myself a large helping. While I dug in, I flipped through the cookbook. I was hit with a wave of shock when I saw that the sweet potato casserole was included. At the bottom of the page it said, 2 tablespoons hawthorn flesh. I remembered the hawthorn tree that grew near Grandma's house. Sometimes in October, there would be little red berries hanging from its branches. I sat there for a minute, letting the taste of human flesh and Thanksgiving's past sit on my tongue. I smiled. Somehow, the casserole was even better than Grandma's, and I couldn't wait to share it. It was just another day at school. Cooper was just the same as ever, hunched over on his desk, stabbing his eraser with a borrowed pencil. Then the door opened, which he shrugged off as just Carla coming back from the bathroom. Except it wasn't. It was someone new. His dark hair thrown back in a messy fashion, sharp jaw, a light button-up with dark skulls on it, and army green shorts. The boy walked in, and Mr. Ortez introduced him into the class. His name was John. Cooper was very uninterested, until John looked right at him for a second or two, and just stared at him. "What is he looking at?" whispered Travis, Cooper's best friend. "Well, obviously me, but if he keeps it up, he's gonna get put in his place." John sat down at the back of the class, 2 rows behind Cooper and Travis, and for the rest of the class, Cooper had a terrible feeling in his gut, like he had seen something sickening. Later that day, during lunch, Cooper and Travis were sitting at their usual spot against the wall on the inner side of campus, away from most other kids. "These other kids need to seriously understand you can't ask for answers," Cooper complained. "Their parents probably never told them no. Bunch of spoiled brats." Travis responded. Footsteps approached the 2, which they'd expected to look and see a teacher who overheard, or maybe Travis's counselor to ask why he didn't show up to their meeting today. But neither were expecting to see John, carrying his lunch tray and sitting down next to Cooper. "Hey, John, anybody sitting here?" The silence and cold stares weren't enough of a hint. "I'll take that as a no. So what do you 2 do over here for fun anyways?" John asked curiously. "Why do you care? We just talk," Cooper told him. "Just making conversations. I don't know anyone here, and I thought it'd be a good idea to start small." Travis was never fond of people, especially new ones. "Well, you thought wrong. We get along best by ourselves, thanks." John took this lightly. "Oh, I get that. My uncle works for a construction company and liked to sit by himself at the construction sites, but then he opened up a bit and now he goes drinking every Friday after work with his other work buddies." Both the boys were still on the edge and didn't trust him for a second. The bell rang, signaling lunch was over, and they'd have 6 minutes to get to their next class, which would be both Cooper's and John's last class for the day. Cooper started his long walk home, and Jan ran to catch up to him. "Hey, Cooper, didn't think you were going to stop." Yeah, I've got headphones in. Did you want to ask me something? Cooper knew he wanted to be friends, but there was something very off-putting about John. The way he looked and talked didn't match whatsoever. It seemed like some grand facade. Oh no, I just wanted to talk. I know you and Travis aren't the most social people, but I think we could be pretty good friends, John explained. What gives you that idea? Well, your shirt is a start. Nirvana's one of my favorites. I love Smells Like Teen Spirit most. Oh great, he's one of those guys, Cooper thought. Yeah, they're pretty good, Cooper responded dryly. Oh, that's my house. See you later then, John said as he went up the steps of a new house with a fresh coat of paint on it, which didn't match the other buildings on the street. Darker tones and many years old. That night, Travis had called Cooper. Smells like Teen Spirit? Smells like the only song you know. He's just one of those kids, annoyingly perfect, too kind, and overly basic. I bet his favorite Marvel movie is Avengers Endgame. Yeah, I don't trust him either. We just need to get him off of us, but I'm not sure how easy that's gonna be, Cooper said. Hey, remember that old factory we found with a really deep basement? Yeah, what about it? Travis asked. Well, we could ask him to hang or something and bring him out there, drop him in the basement and leave. If that doesn't send him the right message, I don't know what will. Dude, that's crazy. Do you remember how far that drop is? It's a good 30 to 40 feet, and I'm pretty sure the ground is solid concrete. Even if he lives, his legs would break and he'd probably die down there. I don't know, dude. I'm really sick of him. Yeah, so am I, but I don't think killing him just because he's really annoying is the right way to go about this. I'm going to bed. You should too. The next day was very fuzzy for Cooper. He only really woke up after school when he talked to John on his way home. And that's how I got this scar, John finished. That's crazy. Hey, do you want to go hang out later? There's some abandoned factory near my house if you want to come check it out. Oh, yeah, I'd love to go, John responded. The factory was located on 42nd and Westcroft, 3 blocks away from Cooper's house. He had felt numb on the walk to the factory. Every sound was getting drowned out, and he was just thinking of how he was going to do this. When they finally reached the factory, Cooper led John inside and made his way to the back corner. Whoa, this place is crazy. It's huge, John exclaimed. Yeah, it's a pretty nice place to relax, Cooper responded in a flat voice. Hey, come here, Cooper told John, showing him the hole in the ground where the floor had been caved in. And from what little light was shining through, the bottom had piles of concrete. John walked over to the edge and looked over into the hole. Cooper took a couple slow steps to get behind John and quickly pushed him in. John made a quick gasp and flailed his arms for a second, and then a moment of silence. Then there was a crack. John's body hit the bottom, and Cooper stood in shock of what he'd just done. John was still conscious, breathing heavily and crying out. Cooper leaned over the edge to see John's mangled body on the floor. His leg was bent backwards, both arms had been pierced by rebar, and his entire torso had been shifted. Fear began to seep down Cooper's spine. He started hyperventilating and shaking, his hands trembling. Cooper took off running all the way back home. He skipped dinner and went straight to his bedroom. Cooper didn't sleep that night, or the one after that. He started to hear John's voice echo through his head. Sometimes he thought he'd seen him out of the corner of his eye, standing against a wall. This ate away at him, and he thought that the only way to relieve himself of these terrors would be to go back to the factory and seal the hole to the basement. Cooper knew this was ridiculous, but was desperate to rid himself of the guilt. Cooper snuck out at 1:30 a.m. on Saturday, 4 days after, and went out to the factory, taking the long way through the hiking trail so that he wouldn't be seen on the public streets. Cooper finally reached the factory, his hands already shaking. He brought with him a flashlight and a backpack that had a large tarp, and a couple of rocks inside, so he could cover the hole and use the rocks to hold the tarp from blowing away or falling in. He went inside, running to the back corner so he could go back home as quickly as possible. When he reached the corner, Cooper took a deep breath, got down on his hands and knees, and slowly leaned over the edge. He shined his flashlight down the hole and was horrified at what he'd seen. He expected to see John's body, but that definitely wasn't John. The body at the bottom had light hair and a more round face, the opposite of John. Cooper was horrified, shaking even worse than before. He wasn't even sure what he saw was real, so he leaned over the pit and took a long look at the bottom. His hand slipped, and he didn't have enough time to catch himself. Cooper dropped straight down and landed right on top of the other body, the flashlight rolling away. He'd been impaled and had several bones broken, and with the little breath he had, he cried for help. His flashlight had still been on, but dimming quickly. Cooper looked over at the lit area, and through his tear-filled eyes saw the silhouette of a person examining his suffering. His vision faded, and he let out one final breath. Cooper was never found. I've got to admit, though, it was strange watching this all unfold and not be able to interfere. However, he did have it coming. My job is to observe and record without interference. I could lose my job if I did. It's almost relaxing being able to watch it all go down, though. Not having a care in the world, just being allowed to watch the madness ensue. To see the world burn right in front of you. And it isn't even your problem. This was test number 3. Only 77 more. The show must go on.
Nina has been my best friend since I was old enough to form memories, and likely earlier than that. She's been around for first days, first tries, first dates, first cries. And like all childhood friends, we had traditions. Every year she made me decipher messages on my birthday. It started when I turned 7. We had just discovered words and somehow caught wind of the fact their letters could be jumbled to prevent the adults from knowing what we were up to. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I still have the card, sloppy letters and all. Fifth pay irkbeti etem em ta het krap tanio. We got a kick out of the quasi-swear word and ended up playing outside for most of the day, almost missing dinner. This one simple message led to years of fun. I looked forward to Nina's birthday cipher more than the day itself or any presents I would get. They became more complex over the years. When I turned 14, I got a plain card with blocky writing on either side. On the left, A1. On the right, 13, 25, 8, 15, 21, 19, 5, 1, 20, 14, 9, 14, 5. We had a sleepover that night and watched some half-hearted documentary about people finding creepy things in the woods. As an adult, I knew it was bullcrap. As a kid, I couldn't bear to look for more than half of the movie. But Nina practically didn't blink. She loved it. Do you think we would find something like that in the forest? Should we go there and look? What about tomorrow night? We can meet there just before dark and go in together. I can get flashlights and whistles and... Thankfully, we had other movies to watch, and she was sufficiently distracted by them to forget all about the forest adventures she had hastily planned for us. My 18th birthday was bittersweet. I had gotten into my dream school and was facing the prospect of moving out of the only town I've ever known. Nina had decided to stick around, and we knew our time as together all day, everyday best friends was coming to an end. Still, we agreed to stay in touch and see each other whenever I came home. And of course, as always, she had a cipher for me. They had been getting much more complex, so this one took me a bit to figure out. When I did, I almost couldn't bring myself to follow it. Tenet. Rafts not are their lists until tan fatal pants primp line and hen. I did what she asked and found her standing at the edge, just out of reach at the enveloping darkness, hovering and hiding secrets from the outside. She hadn't forgotten about the movie we watched years ago. She was just waiting. We're adults now, there's nothing to be afraid of. Come on, let's have one last adventure before you ditch me for school and come back as a boring old woman. She ran in without looking back. The darkness swallowed her completely as she entered. I froze for a split second, and then ran after her. It took what seemed like hours for my eyes to adjust. When they did, I could barely make out Nina's silhouette walking ahead in front of me. Hey, where are we going? No response. She'd always had a flair for the dramatic. She kept walking and I followed, staying close to her and trying to avoid brushing up against sharp branches or unsavory plants. The forest was wedged between an apartment building and a shopping plaza, but it felt like it would never end as we stumbled through it. As we went deeper, silence wrapped around us. No birds, no bugs, no small animals. Just the sound of footsteps on twigs and leaves. A single set of footsteps. Mine. I couldn't see Nina anymore. The darkness seemed thicker, the silence heavier. The forest more alive yet devoid of life. My eyes weren't adjusting. I could barely see a few steps ahead of me. In the deep well of silence, my quick, shallow breathing was a jet engine. My heart beat like a jackhammer in my chest, and my stomach threatened to fly away. I waved my arms around and felt nothing. A faint touch, like a gentle breeze, brushed against my neck. I screamed. I bolted like prey from a predator, using my hands to navigate and weave between the trees. I didn't want to know what I was running from, and I didn't care. I felt its presence, its gaze, its hunger. My legs pumped with fiery energy, my lungs ached, everything was a blur. I tumbled out of the forest at full speed, unable to keep my footing. A moment later, I was on my back, staring at the night sky, sucking in as much air as my scorching lungs could hold. Nina came galloping out after a few seconds, mouth twisting into a snarl, squinted eyes scanning her surroundings until she found me. Her gaze pierced my own and inspected me from my sweat-glistened forehead to my brush-torn legs. She suddenly broke out into a car salesman's smile. Where did you go? Sorry I ran in so quickly. I was just excited, right? You must have been spooked by a branch or something. Come, there's a spot I wanted to show you where all the older kids hang out. It'll be so cool. Trust me. Just come with me. I stared at her familiar face, one which I no longer recognized. I scurried to my feet and went home without saying a word. I looked back once to see her still standing at the edge of the darkness. A week later, I was off to college. Nina wasn't there to say goodbye. My mom said that her parents passed away a few days after I left, the victims of what looked like an attempted home invasion that ended horrifically. Murders never happen in our town, so it made the front page of everything. They left out the grisliest details. The words torn, shred, and mutilated were enough. I sent flowers and tried calling, but still couldn't get through. Nina opted for a private cremation. No burial. I tried to reach out to my once best friend repeatedly with no reply. I gave up after I came home for the summer and she didn't bother to call or see me. Time and life happened. We fell out of contact and went down different paths in different towns, leading different lives. I turned 26 yesterday. I finished college, started a new job, and moved on. I have my own place and I feel like I'm finally coming into my own. Today, a card came in the mail. It didn't have a return address, but I could tell who it was from almost immediately. Though, I'm not sure how she got my address. The telltale plain card with scribbled writing on either side slipped out of the envelope. My blood ran cold the instant I read it. On the left, AZBYCX. On the right, GSZG DZHMG MRMZ.
So this was an actual event that happened to me when I was very, very small and I was going shopping with my mom for a back to school session. We have this really cool outdoor mall near my house, and my mom and I were going shopping. We stopped by the art supply store and got some things that I would be needing and a couple of extras. We stopped by a couple of different clothing stores, and we were aiming to go to the grocery store last so we could bring everything straight home. We had gone to a couple of basic stores like Kohl's and Target, TJ Maxx, but there's a really good sale going on in Old Navy, so we decided to go to Old Navy even though we never have really gone there. So we go, it's all fine. So we're in the Old Navy, it's all fine. There are actually some really good clothes at the time that fit me. I was about 8 years old, and we started piling them on and getting things in the changing room, and my mom was looking for clothes for her as well. And we were in the very back part of the store, and at some point she sent me to the front to get a cart because we had that much clothes. So I do. I go to the front of the store and I grab a cart, and it's a pretty big Old Navy. You wouldn't think it is just by looking at it from the outside. It looks kind of tiny, but once you're inside, it's surprisingly huge. So I go to the front of the store, and I grab a cart and I'm running back towards my mom trying to find her. She can be pretty elusive in the store sometimes. And I realize that there is a grown man following me. Of course, this really scared me because I'm an 8-year-old girl at the time or so, and I was always very petite. I was the smallest in my class pretty much always. And my mom is constantly paranoid of like this sort of thing happening, and so she kind of raised me to be extremely paranoid of this exact situation. So I didn't really know what to do. I was going towards the back. He kept kind of like managing to cut me off somehow in ways I can't quite remember. I couldn't really see a whole lot of other people, and if they did, they seemed distracted. I was seriously considering like screaming out or saying, "Leave me alone," or kicking something over or something, but I was also just in so much shock, and I just wanted to find my mom, or at least like a store employee who maybe could shoo him away. But he kept following me, and I could not find my mom, so I decided to just run. I literally just ran away from him while pushing this cart, and excuse me. At some point, there's this game that I had played with my mom when I was even smaller that she always hated because it involved me basically playing hide and seek in the store. I'm sure a lot of other kids have done that. And I would jump into like clothing racks, and she like wouldn't be able to see me. So I decided that that was training for this exact moment, and that the only way I was going to get away from this man was to hide. Which is great because I'm super tiny and I've never lost a game of hide and seek. So to this day. So anyways, I run from him. I do a couple of corners. I imagine it might have been a little easy for him to lose sight of me because I was so much shorter than the clothing racks, even though he was like tall from what I remember. Like I think I might have been obscured from what he could see. So at some point I ditched the car. I like had pushed it forward to maybe make it seem like I had gone a little bit farther than I actually did. And I jumped into a clothing rack that was closer to me at the moment from pushing the cart. And I hid in that clothing rack. I watched him walk past it. I perhaps considered that maybe this guy was just a normal customer, and maybe he was trying to tell me something, or maybe he didn't realize he was following me. I don't know, but he just walked past where I was and did not see me or find me, and I didn't hear him interact with the cart at all. Like he didn't push it, and he didn't seem to like linger or meander in my general vicinity. So I waited a few minutes. By this point, I imagine my mom was like super freaked out, like what's taking her so long to get this cart? But I waited a few minutes to make sure that he was gone. And then I peeked out through the clothes. I couldn't see him anywhere, so I really quickly got out, grabbed the cart, and like just ran to where I thought my mom was in the back. And I finally found her, and I told her what happened, and it really freaked both of us out. So we just purchased the clothes that we knew already worked. We didn't bother to try on any of the new ones. And we paid for the clothes and left. And to this day, I still live in the same house, and I still go to the outdoor mall. There's a lot of things there, you know, like Target and stuff. There's some nice restaurants, etc. And, you know, you walk past the Old Navy pretty often too. But because of that experience, I refuse to ever go into that Old Navy ever again. The end.